This is Sneaker Gears. My name is Levi, and welcome to an exciting episode of Performance Gears, where today we're doing a comparison between the KD12 and the newly released KD13. Let's jump right in. All right, so full disclosure, obviously during this time in April 2020, we were at stay-at-home protocol or quarantine because of coronavirus. So I have not been able to take these to the court. So this is going to be a breakdown between these two where I have used these casually for about 6 to 8 hours for 2 days, as well as did a couple at-home workouts with squats, burpees, skater jumps, just getting an idea of how the cushion is going to feel. But obviously nothing's going to replace actually using these and playing with them on court. So take that with a grain of salt and how you will. Obviously I want to do my best comparison possible, but these have not been used on the court, so please don't rip me in the comments. I do want to be upfront about it. So as always, the thing everyone wants to know about, how do these guys fit? So the big question with the fit on the KD13 was, how is it going to be compared to the 12 for wide footers? Now, looking at the 12, it used a fairly soft and malleable upper, so it did actually mold to your foot fairly well. Midfoot, you were just fine if you have a wide midfoot. If you had more of a girthier foot or high instep, you're going to be fine with the tongue. But those with wide feet or a wide toe box, you can see just how narrow that really is, as well as how pointy it gets. Now, these did run a little bit long. Let me see if I can line them up for you guys. So if you just want to give it just a little, you can tell these run a little long, but at the same time, I was able to get these in a 12.5, so that gives you guys an idea. I had to do a 13 on these. I don't think I could have gone down even a half size, just because they definitely run narrow. Now, looking at the KD13, it's not quite as pointy, so it is going to have ever so slightly more room in the toe box. Now, this being a 12.5, this fit me as tight as possible while still being comfortable. And I also want to highlight the fact that I did use some Hyper Elite socks that are actually a little bit thicker, and that was the first day. And after about 2 hours or so of just walking around, this whole part is just foam, and you actually sit inside the foam a little bit. So because of that, this does mold a little bit. Now, at the same time, the upper is not nearly as soft or forgiving, but it does mold a little bit. And again, this is out without a lot of heat or actual running, so hopefully it gives a little bit more. Second day, I used some thinner socks, some NBA socks, how they used to be a couple years ago. So not the Nike NBA, but just the NBA socks, and they fit really nice. Now, one thing you guys do want to take note, if you have a high foot, whether it's a high instep or this is called kind of the girth of your foot, where it's kind of that top part, this shoe runs super narrow up top. So from the height of my foot here, even though I'm able to loosen this all the way down, it was 1-to-1 as close as it got. So I can definitely see a lot of players having some uncomfortable fit up here. Now, I said this was foam, and this kind of had some give to it, which is the midfoot. The toe box, as it does start to narrow, and you can see kind of how it comes in here, it's still narrow, guys. Now, I think it's a little more forgiving than the KD12, so I would say this is slightly more wide foot friendly. And again, if I got a 13 in this, maybe that'll give me some wiggle room. As it is now, the 12.5 fits me really tight, but I think in a good way, like just enough. That is probably the most negative part of the shoe. I know Nightwing, a couple of reviewers have talked about the material, how it feels kind of cheap, but just listening to it, guys, you have something super soft and then super kind of plasticky. But honestly, as long as it's rugged, it molds to your foot, it moves well, it doesn't require too much break-in. We're talking about performance upper. I don't care. We're not talking about leather or some high quality material. I wouldn't be mad if they put leather on this though. So fit, hopefully that does help you guys. The upper, if you guys see here, it is slightly lower, so it doesn't feel as much of a high top, which is what I thought, as well as the foam that they used here is kind of like a nice soft memory foam. It is a little bit rubbery, feels really nice even with low cut socks. So overall, I like the fit. I'm glad it worked, and it was still tight. So my wide footer out there, go a half size up at least. And if you have a wide toe box, just kind of pray it might work. You might have to go up that full size, but I can tell you, because of the tightness from the height of the foot here, that may or may not work for a lot of players. All right, now for the second biggest thing, probably third biggest thing, the support, which again, in just home workout use, is a huge upgrade. So let's start with the base. All right, so looking at the shoe, you can see it is a lot less rounded. It does have a slight rounded edge, and similar to what we had on the Why Not 3, it is not nearly as rounded as what we got with the KD12, which you can just see the rounded edge here, as well as this was rounded all the way through. So what happened is this was kind of easy to sprain your ankle. At the same time, I trusted it. I never had an issue, but at the same time, it wasn't confidence inspiring. This, you feel way more locked in. You have a lot more of a leveled edge here. You have a slight outrigger. You can kind of see right here, even at the heel, which does make a difference. It's a slightly wider base. So overall, stability portion of having a more supportive shoe is a huge upgrade. Secondly, containment. Now, this shoe was similar to, like I said before in my initial review last year, kind of like a Jordan 28 or 29. The support doesn't feel like it's there, but once you play in it, it is a lot better than you think. This, and again, just on skater jumps, just on kind of quick motions in my workout, the material is definitely cheaper, but it's stronger, it's thicker, it does feel a little more plasticky, and you definitely feel like it's more contained. Now, how is that going to feel when you're really on court and putting a lot more force on it? We'll know, but at least initially it feels better. And I think the big issue with that is the way it locks you in. These straps right here, you guys can see, actually do a fantastic job of really pulling you back into the heel cup, which again, it's nothing crazy. This didn't have a crazy heel cup either, but it pulls you back enough where you really feel locked in. Not to mention, like I said, this is kind of a tight fit, especially for me. So the fit being locked in, having a stable base really made a huge difference. This did not feel like a KD from yore. This definitely felt honestly closer like something what we got with the Why Not line, where this felt a lot more supportive than any KD12s in the past, especially in recent years. The KD11 was probably the worst culprit. KD10 was pretty bad. KD9 was decent. You keep going, the KD8 wasn't spectacular. It was probably the KD7 with the foamposite that actually had the most kind of containment and support than what we're getting here, and this might have surpassed that as well as the KD12. So huge shout out to the Nike team at making this a lot more of a supportive shoe. All right, so now for the meat and potatoes, the cushion, and that's where this is really a step in a different direction we got in the KD12. Now, if you didn't see my kind of preview or overview video, the KD12 is one of the best cushion setups of all time, and the reason for that is not just that Zoom Strobel, but those holes that they made in the midsole that just made it flexible and allowed that Zoom to react and reflect. So it just made it bouncy. The Zoom Air unit itself was not that thick, but it kind of didn't matter. It felt bouncy underfoot, but it still allowed you to play quickly. Now, the second iteration of Zoom Strobel, which a lot of you guys maybe didn't know, was the Zoom Universe. This had a Zoom Strobel setup, but it was completely encased. It was completely cupped. Now, it wasn't like the Jordan 1, what is it, the Fearless or Jordan 1 Zoom, where that used that old school rubber, not a foam. So those had Zoom, but it didn't really feel that great. This felt similar to the KD12, but because it didn't have that flexion, it wasn't as flexible, and you didn't have as much bounce in the forefoot as you did. But this was still amazing. This was one of the best compromises of any shoe. You got loads more support in the heel and containment, way better traction. And this was one of my top shoes of the year for 2019. The Zoom Universe is an incredible version of using Zoom Strobel. But you missed that forefoot bounce just a little bit, and that's where they came out with that double stacked in the KD13. So in the KD13, which they just came out with a cutaway recently, and I'll post it here, uses the same Zoom Strobel setup. So honestly, the heel cushion feels almost the same, even though you're getting double stacked in the KD12. You don't really miss that. As you roll forward, that transition, again, is still beautiful. It's still full length zoom. It's just such a smooth transition, heel to toe. The forefoot is about the same, guys. Because they took out the holes and that flexibility and the ability for the zoom to move with you a little bit more, they double stacked it. So even though it doesn't feel as firm as the Universe does, it gives it a very similar feel to what the KD12 had. They just went about it in a different way, where they really had to replace that flexibility and those holes with more zoom to compensate. Now, this still feels a little bit more cushioned. I'm saying maybe 15-20% more. So if you like that balance that the KD12 offered, this is giving you a little bit more cushion, and honestly feels a lot like the Why Not 3 in the forefoot, where this has a giant zoom unit in the forefoot, but it's not quite as bouncy as you would think. The biggest difference between these two is going to be really the transition. This has kind of a firm feeling heel with just a average phylon, nothing really there, and it really wants you to stay in the balls of your feet with a lot bigger zoom pod in the forefoot. This is just a really smooth transition, whether you are landing on your heel, your midfoot, you go to your forefoot. This feels way better executed. This might have more support, but it's really close, and this is really making it, even though you're spending a little bit more money on this versus this one, and this you can already get on sale in certain colorways, you're spending more money and you're getting a lot more shoe. So as far as what people think that zoom is going to feel like, again, we'll know on court if this breaks in, if this flexes, it becomes way better than the KD12, but at least initially it's very similar. And finally, the traction. It's kind of beast mode, guys. It's I haven't played on the hard court just because I can't go to a gym. We do have hardwood floors in my home, and just playing with these two in hand, as far as jumping around, doing jumping jacks, sliding back and forth, this sticks way better on my home floor. That could literally mean nothing, but at the same time, the rubber they use is a lot more firm than you would think. So this is something that is going to be durable. It's a lot deeper than what we got on the PG4. This is definitely very similar to what the PG3 did. And the PG3, like I said in my kind of preview, the traction on that is Hall of Fame level. So I'm expecting great traction from this, but that's one we're not really going to know until we can take to the courts. All right, overall, this shoe, I am just as excited now that I have in hand as I was before. So I'm glad kind of my suspicions and my analysis was correct early on, just really super early on, obviously not taking to court. One thing I did want to mention is this blue piece right here is the only solid piece here. The gray, that is soft. Back here, this gray is actually really soft. It's just a different colored foam. And the only other shoe that has that is your Kobe 9, that little carbon fiber piece. It's I don't know if it does much, but if it worked for the Kobe 9, hopefully in the KD13, it's going to add maybe a touch more lateral stability. Who knows? But that's the only firm piece, so it does seem rather odd, and it is kind of below where your foot is. It's not really holding where your toe is, because your foot does not sit that low within this midsole. But overall, guys, that was just a little pointer I wanted to touch on. But otherwise, I'm excited to use this shoe. This is fantastic. I wish I could play in it because there's a couple other colorways coming out, and if I could play in it and tell you how much I love it, I would probably double up on the pairs. If you are looking for something that has a lighter feel, that's more flexible, the materials are just going to give a little bit more, especially out of a higher instep or kind of a more girthier foot on top. As long as this shoe fits you, because it was a little bit more narrow, don't be afraid to double up on these guys. You can get this for super cheap. I've seen them as much as half off at 75, 80 bucks. So as far as the cushion feel, I'm not ready to say which one is better yet, but I can say they did a good enough job on this where maybe it's not a complete upgrade, but if it's close to that, we got a winner here. If you liked that video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions that I didn't touch on, please put them in the comments, as I do try to hit back to everybody. As always, really appreciate you guys. This is Levi Sneaker Gears, and I'll come at you later.